Unlike Dogman narratives like this,
It screamed and clawed at the air as if it could fight off the light.
which seem to have some of their audience believing that it's real, burying this only in their description, I'm going to share with you a couple of real eyewitness encounters drawn from interviews done by Linda Godfrey, author of The Michigan Dogman. And if you know anything about the Dogman, you know it's a nebulous creature, and there's more misinformation about it than there is of Bigfoot. And that's saying something. But the truth is that there are a lot of people out there who are absolutely convinced that they've seen a creature standing 8 foot tall, 4 feet wide, just a pure block of muscle, more vicious and terrifying than you can imagine. But what is this thing really? Many would argue that the Dogman is merely a misidentified known animal, such as a bear or a wolf. And maybe some of those sightings are just that. But the more I research this cryptid, the more interviews I listen to, the more terrified people who are relating their stories, the more I'm convinced that this thing, whatever it is real. Whether they are some sort of werewolf variant or some kind of demon, I'm not sure. In fact, they could actually be the remnant of an ancient, extinct race. And I heard from the Dogman himself that unless you like this video right now, this thing is gonna come scratching at your door tonight. So, I mean, it's really up to you. All throughout history, people have talked about men with heads of dogs. You need look no further than Anubis, the Egyptian god of the dead, and he wasn't the only Egyptian god to don a dog head. Even Jason and the Argonauts fought a race of dog-headed people. Historians Herodotus and Hesiod both mention a race of dog-headed people living in remote parts of the world. These creatures were all over, so much so that they had their own name. They were Cynocephalus, that is to say, dog-headed people. Ctesias, a Greek physician, wrote at length about a group of people numbering in the hundreds of thousands who inhabited the rugged mountainous regions of India. He said, "In these Indian mountains, there live men with the head of a dog, and they bark like dogs. They have tails, and they live on raw meat." These very dog-headed people had an alliance with the king of India, who knew all about them, and they lived in the caves of the mountains using leaves for blankets. Ctesias also noted that they couldn't be defeated in war. And an interesting note he makes is that they live longer than a normal man, sometimes up to 200 years. But these are all ancient accounts. Today, there don't appear to be any specific groups of dog-headed people living on the planet, but rather, we get lone apparitions who apparently roam the deep woods, but sometimes venture into the path of you and me. In January 1994, in the same area as the Reed City sightings of Dogman discussed in my last Dogman video, about 2 miles south of that abandoned school, a teenager snuck out of his parents' farmhouse in the cold, dead night of winter to smoke. This is something he did fairly regularly. He was leaned up against a garage looking out into the snowy darkness, and in that darkness there was an old barn he could see in the distance. This was an old, dilapidated barn, and he stared at it, puffing on his cigarette, blowing smoke into the cold night air. Suddenly, his eyes caught hold of a strange, dark shape jutting out of the barn that he had never noticed before. Curiously scrutinizing the shape, he thought it must just be some sort of old farm equipment. Maybe someone had moved it recently into that spot, but all he could see was a strange, motionless silhouette. This is what he justified, just farm equipment, but for some reason he couldn't take his eyes off the object. He couldn't quite figure out what it was, and it bothered him. And as he smoked into the night, and as silly as he felt, this object started to disconcert him, and he didn't know why. The minutes drew into a half an hour, and he still stared nervously at this unmoving thing, becoming almost transfixed by it. Then suddenly, rustling was heard in the nearby forest. This broke him out of his spell, and he quickly looked into that darkness to see what it was. He didn't see anything. It was probably just a deer running by, but terrifyingly, as soon as he looked, so did that object. His eyes widened and his head snapped back instantly to look at that silhouette, which he now saw as a head with pointed ears that he now realized had been staring at him this whole time. Now, not only was he transfixed on this object that had suddenly become a creature, but now with his heart rate elevated, he became white with fear. A chill shot down his spine, and not from the cold night. This thing was ominous. It shouldn't be where it was. It wasn't any animal he could recognize. It moved his head a little more, and he could make out more features. It was standing on 2 feet, but it was hunched over, with dark fur all over its body. Apparently realizing that it was now spotted, it slowly moved into the light. And while it did that, the teenager, he crept backwards slowly into his garage because he couldn't bear to take his eyes off of this thing for fear it might bolt toward him in an instant. As soon as he was close, he turned and he ran into the house, slamming the door behind him. He told his mom in a dead panic what he'd seen, but she didn't believe him. Then he grabbed a flashlight and cautiously went back out into the garage and shone the light in the direction of the barn, but it was now gone. Nowhere to be seen. He went back into the house and it was late and he tried to get some sleep. The next day he checked for tracks, but there were none, and he measured a snowdrift that was near to where the creature was standing. The drift was about 3 feet high, and he reported that the creature stood about 5 feet higher than the drift, making, by his estimation, a 7 to 8 foot tall creature. He reported that it had a dog-like appearance. It had a pointed nose and pointed ears. He said it was the wrong shape for a bear. It was too tall for a dog, and it was too cold and dark for a human to be playing a prank. Sometime later, his girlfriend came over late one night, and when she got there, she broke down into tears. She was visibly shaken. "What's wrong?" he asked. She wouldn't say for nearly 2 hours, but she finally confided in him that on her way over, she had seen a monster in the woods. It was a large, lurking, hunchback creature, and it looked like a dog, but not anything she was familiar with. He didn't tell her at that time that he had seen the monster too, and they never spoke of it again. Nor did they gratefully see it again, although pets began to disappear in the ensuing months, and he always attributed it to that monster that he saw on that cold, wintry night. In November of 2007, a man going only by Sam was out on a hunting trip with 2 of his friends, hunting near Reed City, Michigan, the old stomping grounds of this Dogman. Sam was 20 years old at the time, and he, along with his 2 friends, were set up in different hunting blinds, and they planned to go out every day for a whole week. But on the first day, around 4:30 p.m., with dusk approaching, he noticed the air get quiet. Birds stopped singing, and the forest went still. Then 2 does and a buck quickly made their way through a clearing he was scouting out, and as he started to raise his rifle, he noticed a thick and pungent smell. It overtook him instantly. It smelled like old mothballs, he said. And suddenly, the deer bolted out of the clearing, followed by a tall, hairy, bipedal creature, to Sam's utter astonishment. His eyes widened, and he noted how large this thing was. It had dark fur and walked upright on 2 feet. He said, not like a bear, but more like a hunchback. A bear, he said, can't walk that fast on 2 feet, not to mention run. And whatever this thing was, it did run through the clearing as if hunting those deer. Then suddenly, Sam noticed that after a full-on sprint through the clearing, it dropped down onto all fours, instantly continuing the pursuit, transitioning between 2 legs and 4 legs seamlessly. Similarly, he reported that it had upright pointed ears, a sleeker body than a wolf, he said, and when it was upright, Sam estimated that it stood about 6 feet tall, and he had a muzzle like a husky. Sam was a little taken back and honestly scared. I mean, he was accustomed to hunting and he knew the predators in the area, but this was nothing like he had ever seen before, and he didn't know what to make of it. And he just decided to stay in his blind until his friends came to come pick him up. And he was debating back and forth whether or not he should even say anything to them. I mean, did he even really see anything strange? It's funny how we humans, when confronted by something so out of the ordinary, it's funny how we can kind of doubt our own visceral experiences and wonder if they even actually happened. But hesitantly, when the day was over, his friends came and picked him up in their truck, and he told them what he saw. And kind of as he expected, they laughed. But he insisted on checking if this predator left any tracks, which, unlike our teenagers' experience, it did. Sam led them to where he saw this thing run, and kind of hoping he wouldn't find any tracks, because he didn't really believe what he saw, and he didn't want to grapple with this reality, but they did find tracks. The tracks looked like large dog prints, and it was clear where it was running on 2 feet, and then transitioning onto 4. And his friends were puzzled too, but they didn't see the creature and thought for sure whatever it was, Sam must have just been overreacting. They considered that it could have been a black bear, but the tracks they saw only showed 4 toes, whereas a bear track shows 5. Either way, somewhat puzzled, the 3 friends packed up for the day and headed back home. And Sam just tried to put the sighting out of his mind. Maybe try to get some sleep tonight. It must have just been a wolf, he tried to justify. But he didn't sleep well that night, and day 2 came, and they were planning on going out for day 2. Except unlike his 2 friends, he decided to stay in for the morning while his friends went out. Then finally, in the afternoon, he shook himself out of it and just decided he really probably was just overreacting, and he got ready and he grabbed his hunting rifle. But he also grabbed a pistol, a buck knife, and a semi-automatic rifle, just in case he needed it. And he got to his spot late in the afternoon. He checked in with his friends on the radio, who were both out in their locations. They were kind of spread out in the forest, and they were just fine. The day was kind of uneventful. And Sam settled into his blind and watched that clearing where he had seen this thing the day before. And everything at first was fairly normal. But then, around dusk, Sam was peering out into that same clearing, and then he heard 3 shots in the distance. He knew it was his friends. He knew it was about 100 yards away. And the shots themselves were nothing to worry about. They were hunting after all, but moments later, screaming came through his radio. Sam jumped down out of his blinds and heard rustling in the woods and raised his rifle. A visceral fear shot through his body. Then suddenly through the brush, his friend burst through, running toward him in a cold sweat, and catching his breath, he exclaimed, "I saw it. It came right at me." The dogman had charged his friend, and his friend, in a panic, shot at it, and he wasn't sure if he had hit it, but after the first few shots, it turned and it took off into the woods. Then the sun went down, and they radioed their other friend, and they're like, "Let's just get out of here. Let's pack up, get out of here, and we'll reevaluate in the morning." That's what they did. Day 3 came, and Sam and his other friend both opted to stay in for the entire day, while friend number 3 felt that they were still overreacting, and bravely or stupidly, he decided to go out by himself first thing in the morning. After all, they were there to hunt. They were experienced hunters. They had weapons, and he, realizing that there may be a predator out there, but he just thought it was a rogue wolf and that he would be fine. He wasn't afraid. And nothing Sam and his other friend could do could convince him otherwise. And so they let him go and kept their radios close for any signs of trouble. And fortunately, friend number 3 had a fairly uneventful day. He went out, came back, and that was that. Day 4 rolls around, and they're all feeling a little better, and maybe they were just overreacting, and they want to make the best of their week, so all 3 of them headed out again in the morning. Sam and friend number 2, though, stuck together, neither one wanting to be alone in those woods. And friend number 3 went off to his same spot by himself, not really too concerned about anything. As the 3 of them were settling in the cold, brisk morning air and the sun just starting to rise, Sam and friend number 2 saw the creature slowly enter the same clearing where he had seen it before. They saw it at the same time, and their hearts sank. They immediately recognized that something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just some wild animal. This thing had presence of mind. It stood on 2 feet, it slowly emerged from the woods, and what's more, it was staring right at where they were camped out in their blind. It was looking at them. Sam even noted that it looked like it was smiling. Friend number 2 immediately raised his rifle, and the creature slowly slunk back into the woods, as if it knew what a gun was. Minutes later, friend number 3 radioed. "Are you guys in a werewolf suit by my blind?" It's not funny. Before they could answer, 5 shots rang out through the woods in quick succession. They radioed back, and there wasn't a response. And they gathered all their stuff, they ran to the truck and gunned it to where his blind was. But before they got there, as they were driving on this gravel road, their friend burst out of the tree line, fumbling over himself, almost falling onto the gravel road, flailing his arms. They stopped, and he jumped in, slammed the door behind him, and screamed to get the hell out of there. They drove away as fast as they could, and he refused to speak about what had happened. But Sam noted that his rifle had deep gouge marks in it. They were claw marks. Later, his friend explained that the creature had appeared almost out of nowhere, and it was so close that it charged him, and it knocked him onto his back. He lifted his gun up, and it slashed at his face, and he shot 5 times. He thought for sure that he must have hit it, but it didn't make a sound, but rather, after the 5th shot, stopped attacking him, looked him dead in the eye, and turned and ran away. It broke off, ran into the woods. This was a real eyewitness testimony given to Linda Godfrey. Those 3 friends never went back to that spot, but what they did see looked an awful lot like what was captured in this photo. This is a photo of an alleged dogman. It's been floating around the internet for years and claims to be a photo from 1961. The story behind the photo goes like this. A night watchman from Michigan near Big Rapids was patrolling the perimeter around a manufacturing plant around 3 a.m. He saw something move out in the street near the gate. A little unnerved, he grabbed his gun. Then he saw a large, furry, muscular animal that walked upright, sometimes dropping down onto all 4s, skulking around his neighborhood. I mean, this thing was a classic dogman. And he shot the beast with his 35mm Kodak Signet camera. And many have said that this is the image of a werewolf, and possibly the very dogman himself that has stalked Michigan for decades, if not centuries. This photo regularly makes the rounds through the paranormal community as one of the rare images of the dogman. However, it looks like this photo has been photoshopped. And you might say maybe somebody just threw it into Photoshop to pull some detail out of it. But even if that's the case, thanks to Unknown, we discover that this is actually a prop from the 2005 movie Cursed. And I checked it out and it looks pretty identical to me. So even though I think the Dogman is real and maybe the 1961 story behind this photo is real, unfortunately the Big Rapids Haymarsh photo itself is not. And if you disagree, let me know in the comments and like and subscribe.